Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Yesterday, I dealt with a section of Professor Ibbo Mandaza's lecture on mostly dwelling on the Zimbabwean elections, the 2023 Zimbabwean elections. I deliberately left out a section of that lecture dealing with what actually happened in 2008, specifically referring to the contribution of the opposition themselves. This is an aspect which I think most Zimbabweans, unfortunately, have failed to appreciate. As much as we blame Zanu PF for the country's economic, political, and social mess and tyrannical rule, we cannot deny that after 43 years and counting, Zimbabwe had many golden opportunities to end this dictatorship. And many of those golden opportunities fell to the opposition, MDC and now CCC. And they've wasted those opportunities. We, Zimbabweans, have been quick at blaming outsiders, and rightly so. Yesterday's discussion and the extract of Professor Mandaza's lecture, I dwelled on how SADC let Zimbabwe down, specifically how South Africa's ANC government let the people of Zimbabwe down. And if you didn't listen to it, it's worth listening to, because I think he explains it very well. But if I had to apportion blame, I would say most of the blame for why we are in this mess has got to point at us Zimbabweans. And within that, us Zimbabweans, yes, we can blame Zanu PF for landing us into this mess. But after 43 years, we had many golden opportunities to get out. And the opposition should have got us out, and they did not. Somebody once said that it is nonsensical for one to keep complaining of the thickness of the walls, of the prison walls, and the height of the out perimeter fence, and the razor fence at the top of it, and the landmines beyond that, i.e. emphasizing how difficult it will be to escape from that prison. The 2008 to 2018 was our get out of jail card. When you have the get out of jail card, you do not want to know how thick the wall is, or how the prison guards have got instructions to shoot to kill. You have got the get out of jail card. People want to know why you failed to use it. And in this particular case, we definitely had our get out of jail card in 2008. The opposition had the golden opportunity to implement the democratic reforms, which would have dismantled Zanu PF once for all. The question is, why did they fail to implement even one token reform? in 5 years of that GNU. This is an issue that most Zimbabweans have tried to avoid. Content with talking about the elephant in the room is Zanu PF. Nobody's saying Zanu PF is not the biggest threat. It is. But you had the opportunity to get out. You had the get out of jail card. Why didn't you use it? And more so, as long as we continue to blame Zanu PF, when CCC and before it MDC are the ones who are getting the opportunity to end the dictatorship and they're failing to do so, and thus perpetuating the Zanu PF dictatorship, we are getting nowhere. The person we sent into the room to drive away the elephant has made friends with the elephant. Now they've made deals where the elephant can stay in the room, they get a share of the spoils of power, and we, the ordinary person, have got to suffer. So it is important that we really pay attention to the quality of our opposition. I'd like to play the video of Professor Ibbo Mandaza speaking about the opposition and the events leading up to the 2008 elections.
That 2008, 28th of March election, Morgan Tsvangirai won. In fact, I remember telling Morgan Tsvangirai that Mugabe had lost by a landslide. And he said, "You mean I won by a landslide?" I said, "No, it's quite different. In Zimbabwe, the vote usually is against, okay? For example, I voted against somebody on the last election. And the pattern of voting in Africa, in particular, but all over, is always to vote against the incumbent, logically. And if you vote for the incumbent, then you must be the very odd one. And in 2008, for example, Mugabe was getting no vote at all in the polling station, in 184. The same thing happened 2018 to Mnangagwa. The same thing happened this time around. The figures will be out very soon from ZESA. But I also know that Mugabe conceded defeat in 2008. He found Mbeki and Obasanjo to concede defeat. I hope that Thabo Mbeki and Obasanjo will one day make that public. But one of them, I won't say which one, told me that Mugabe phoned them that Saturday night and said, "Look, I lost election and I concede defeat." And I know that Mugabe stuck to his guns. I was prepared to go. His wife was since bags packed to go somewhere on the following day when Mnangagwa and Chiwenga approached him and said, "You stay where you are." And then they contrived the runoff, sadly with the help of South Africa. And runoff took place, very violent. 360 people were killed. The South African, I came here as part of a delegation to Cape Town to see members of the ANC. I don't want to mention names, they're my friends. I saw them, and through them, a cabinet committee subcommittee of South African cabinet was set up on the Zimbabwe issue. It was on the basis of that cabinet committee that South Africa did not recognize the runoff. And indeed, it was the basis of that committee that Thabo sent the generals to South Africa, to Zimbabwe. I met them, and I was one of the few to have read the report, because I was flying to Joburg in the company of General Romano, who was a friend. He passed away, And I also took people who had lost their hands in the violence to the South African embassy in Harare. And Romano broke down in tears. How can a liberation movement treat these people like that? He was a broken man. So there's no doubt at all here in South Africa as to the brutality of the regime in Harare. So it amazes me, it angers me, in fact, when I hear the nonsense coming out of people like Mbalula's mouth. They know it. And the report has never been published, the general's report, to this day. That tells you. Is it complicit behavior? I don't know. But to get back to 2008, the runoff took place. Mugabe was sworn in at midnight before boarding a plane with Mbeki to Sharm el-Sheikh. Ambassador, I forgot to mention that. Yes? I'm not talking about it was contrived, but clearly there was a definite plan to keep Mugabe in office. And it's no secret that I had Thabo speaking the other day, saying the Zimbabwean people came together to form the GNU. It's only half true. Morgan Tsvangirai was literally regimented into the GNU. That's a fact. Even though he was partly to blame because he ran away from victory. If he had stuck and not run away to Botswana, he would have been president in June 2008. But he ran away. This fear of death among the opposition in Zimbabwe is sickening. You know, I remember seeing Morgan Tsvangirai the day after the election when he had clearly won, and we knew he had won. And we had called a meeting to confront the SADC observer mission, led by Angola at that time. And Morgan could not be found. Morgan had run away to the South African embassy. So we had to phone the ambassador, very close friend of ours, Makalima. And Makalima made Morgan available for the meeting. I took Morgan through Rainbow Towers, through the back entrance. And after the first flight of stairs, he stopped. He says, "Ibbo, aren't you scared?" Scared of what? Of being killed. I say, "Morgan, are you scared to be killed?" Huh? I took his hand and I ran up with him. I said, we got to the meeting and he fell asleep in the meeting. And the next morning he was off to Botswana. I had to come here to fetch BT. BT also ran away to Cape Town. So the whole opposition ran away to run away from victory. There's a problem with that opposition movement you're talking about. Serious problem of leadership. And therefore, to reference the last election, I have evidence that on the day of the poll, when it was discovered that this was a deliberate ploy to withhold the ballot papers, CCC Shamisa was confronted by his colleagues and said, "Look, let's pull out of the election now. It's no use." And he refused. I've also been told that some of the leaders said, "Look, let's go on the streets." And he refused. So, we have a problem. People are scared to die. So, if you're a leader scared to die, then there's something wrong with you, to put it very humbly. Yeah, you must be paid. If others were killed on the 1st of August, 2018. And when one of our discussions we had on the elections, the question was raised by someone that why is the CCC going on to the elections when they know that the conditions for free fair are not there? And someone stood up and said, you know what? We must make a resolution here in this meeting that if, as is predictable, the elections will not be free, fair, and credible, if Chamisa, after insisting on going for elections, insists on people going on the street, he should go on the street on his own. So you have that lack of confidence in the leadership. The party-state conflation, Ambassador, is really a...
I'll stop there. I think this is an issue that many Zimbabweans have failed to address. The lack of leadership. Like I said, like Bradley acknowledged, it's across the political divide in Zanu PF, as well as in the opposition. But I am focusing on the opposition for the simple reason that many people now have put their faith in the opposition, bringing about the democratic changes necessary to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections so that the country can have free, fair, and credible elections, which I believe is the key to breaking this deadlock. So it is imperative that you get quality opposition. You cannot keep on pretending, as somebody was saying to me the other day, that the elephant in the room is Zanu PF. Yes, the elephant in the room is Zanu PF. But we have sent for the last 23 years the MDC/CCC to get the elephant out of the room. And instead of carrying out the task of driving out the elephant, the opposition have made deals with the ruling party, Zanu PF. They've been participating in these flawed elections, knowing fully well that the elections will be rigged, knowing fully well that by participating, they are only giving Zanu PF legitimacy. But they've continued to participate. This is a statement by Tendai BT, one of probably the leading opposition leaders in Zimbabwe with something between the ears. And in it, he gave this statement in 2015, just emphasizing the sheer futility of keeping on participating in these elections. I'm convinced that he must have gone back to his colleagues and tried to convince them of the same thing, but they ignored him. This is what David Coulthard, another opposition leader with something to offer. He too acknowledged the futility of participating in these elections. But he went on to explain why MDC keep on participating. And he was blunt. It was greed. He participated in 2013 out of greed. He blamed it then, as he's saying there, that, oh, it's because we had failed to make a coalition so that we could all agree to boycott the elections together. They did form a coalition in 2018. The MDC Alliance combined 4 of the main opposition parties, that of the Diabetes, Welshman Ngube, who was leading the MDC with Atham Tabara, and then the main opposition section led by Morgan Tsvangirai himself. And before the elections, he passed away, and Nelson Chamisa took over. And then with 3 other small opposition parties, they made a coalition of this MDC alliance. And yet, there was not even any talk of a boycott. They desperately wanted to win those few seats that they knew Zanu PF is always giving away to entice the opposition to participate. They have been participating in these flawed elections for the same reasons that they failed during the 2008 to 2013 GNU to implement even one meaningful democratic reform. Greed and breathtaking incompetence. I think it is important that people accept that reality. This tussle, even the few people who have accepted that the opposition have let them down, they've somehow managed to convince themselves that no, we should put up with it and unite behind them so that we get Zanu PF out. You're not going to get Zanu PF out if Zanu PF has got the opposition in their pockets. If the opposition are participating in flawed elections for no other reason than greed, as long as they participate, they give the regime legitimacy and thus perpetuate the dictatorship. So pretending that maybe we need to unite behind them and give them our full backing is not helping anything at all. Zimbabweans need to confront that reality, that the opposition is corrupt and incompetent. And I could go on further and say this opposition, MDC, /CCC, has given up on implementing democratic reforms. Whether we like to accept it or not, that is the reality. They've given up. In fact, one of their campaign slogans has been that they have got winning in rigged election strategies. In other words, they've accepted that Zanu PF is rigging these elections, but they will now pretend that they've got strategies of how to win those rigged elections. In fact, that is only a statement to hide why they keep on participating in flawed elections, to justify why they keep on participating in flawed elections. They know that their strategies are just hot air. In this 2023 election, the subtle difference from the 2013 and 2018, for instance, is that in 2013, SADC endorsed the results. They accepted whatever ZEC declared as the winner, and they endorsed it. They did the same thing in 2018. 2023 elections were different in that SADC election observers this time really looked at the process and said, this process is flawed. We are not going to endorse it, regardless of what the opposition have decided to do. They stood up and said, no, we are not going to endorse it. And hence creating this unique opportunity for Zimbabwe to have a second GNU And in the second GNU, it is absolutely imperative that we do not make the same mistake we made in the last one, i.e., get corrupt and incompetent MDC/CCC and look to them to implement the democratic reforms we desperately need. It is absolutely imperative. As much as we're putting on pressure on SADC that they must uphold the SADC election observer mission's report, we must also be clear what we want to happen after that. We must not have the same corrupt, incompetent opposition leaders who failed to implement even one meaningful reform during the last GNU. I believe Ibbo Mandaza was right here. If the opposition had not been in such a hurry to run away in 2008 and stood firm, I think the country would have had a totally different outcome. The willingness of the opposition to run away, in fact, in their own account, they acknowledge that during those 6 weeks of recounting the votes, some of the Zanu PF officials had met up with Morgan Tsvangirai and his team to negotiate a government of national unity. And they had shown a willingness to form a government of national unity. So already, their willingness to give up, to share power with Zanu PF, even before the GNU was proposed, was already there. And this was the kind of encouragement that Zanu PF only needed. Zanu PF got the mentality of asking for a foot, and if you give them a foot, they'll take a yard and come back tomorrow and ask for a mile. You give up on the mile, they'll take 20 miles, come back the following day and demand more. The more they get, the more they realize they're convinced they can get even more. And so it is no surprise at all that the GNU of 2008 to 2013 achieved absolutely nothing. When Mugabe appointed Morgan Tsvangirai and his friends into ministerial positions and gave them ministerial cars, the generous salaries and allowances, and for Morgan Tsvangirai himself, the $4 million mansion, Mugabe immediately knew he had them in his pockets. In return for the spoils of power, Morgan Tsvangirai and company abandoned the thought of implementing any reforms. One of Zanu PF, in fact, it was a common, understood belief within Zanu PF circles that MDC guys will never implement any meaningful reforms during the GNU because they've learned to enjoy the spoils of power without rocking the boat. That is the same mentality that has stopped them, that has kept them participating in flawed elections, because they want a share of the spoils of power. Even when SADC and the AU election observers had said these elections were a sham, Chamisa and company, and these MDC, these CCC friends, we had won the NECs in the elections, were determined to take up their gravitating seats. And by now, I'm sure they have all received some of the immediate benefits of being a member of parliament or senator, is the US $60,000 car allowance. If they haven't received it yet, it's because they're not so sure what's going to happen with all this SADC. But if they have, I can bet you they are in a hurry to spend it, because they don't want to be told that the whole government is illegitimate and they should give it back. This is the reality. The opposition, the people of Zimbabwe have got to accept the opposition was sent there for a task, but they've since compromised themselves to the point where they are never going to implement any meaningful reforms. Never. And if we get into the new GNU, it will be absolutely ridiculous that they should play any part in that GNU. We want the GNU to implement the democratic reforms and get the country out of this mess. CCC are not committed to that. That is the number one message I'd like to leave tonight. We, the people of Zimbabwe, have to play our part if we are going to get out of this mess. As much as outsiders are interfering, like the ANC in South Africa, if we, the ordinary Zimbabweans, play our part, we can still get out of this mess. And in fact, without our active cooperation, even if SADC, like I said, was to act and say, no, this GNU, this Zanu PF regime is illegitimate, they'll be tempted to appease Zanu PF and CCC by allowing them to form the GNU. And I can tell you now that GNU will at best deliver some of the reforms, but not all. And therefore, then we'll end up maybe with a slightly improved political system, but nonetheless, one that will invariably have many faults in it. And so the, the cycle of mediocre government will continue. We can change the situation in Zimbabwe, but we need to be clear what is it we want. And at the present moment, two things. We want SADC to condemn the 2023 elections as a farce. And this present Zanu PF government, including the opportunistic CCC, declared illegitimate. The way forward, we want a national transition authority that will not have Zanu PF and CCC playing any role in it. Zanu PF and CCC are the reason why we are in this mess. They are the problem. They cannot be the solution too. Unless we are clear what we want, we are not getting out of this mess. Thank you very much and good night.